Hello and welcome to my video, Donald Jensen, for EDAD 701 week 2, where this week we'll be looking at topics centrally hovering on cultures in school, what cultures in schools mean, and kind of how those shape and impact some of the aspects of our school. So just as we did last week, I will break down each section and read the prompts for each section and then answer them. So once again, if there are any questions or specific content areas anybody is looking for, it'll be a little bit easier to search for them that way. So some of the topics that we'll cover today here, we'll continue to build some background knowledge where we will look at some of the work environments I have worked in, times where I felt comfortable, maybe other times where I didn't feel comfortable as well, what was going on there and what the situation was like. We will also take a look at some areas of responsibility and roles of director of instruction within the educational system. We'll be taking a look at gifted and talented programs. We'll be looking at RTI interventions, or response to interventions. We'll be taking a look at ESL programs, and we'll also be taking a look at library and media services and just kind of covering some of the basics of them, what they are, how they function in the schools that I work in, and some other general information on those as well. And then we'll also take a look, circle back to cultures within schools. We're looking at a school or a school district. What does it mean to have a culture? How does your culture impact a school? And where does changing a culture or impacting a culture start? And how does that process shape itself? And then we'll wrap up here at the end, going over some information from the works of Larry Ainsworth and Akira Donovan from their work in rigorous curriculum and design as well. So I'm starting at the top though with section 1, going on some of that background knowledge. We'll start off with talking about some of the times about the culture of a place and where I worked, where I felt my best as a professional. What were some contributing factors? Were they intentional? And how did you know? So for myself, I have been a special education teacher now for 6 years, and I have worked in the same building for those 6 years. Positives and negatives to that. Positives, I think it's good for me to have consistency, and I've obviously worked in a place where I felt comfortable staying for 6 years. I know other educators who have had to jump around a bit because they didn't feel comfortable in their work environment. So I've been very lucky and fortunate in that regard. And in my 6 years there, I've gone through 2 director of special educations. The first director of special education I had there was a great influence on my educational career, my professional career, and my growth and development as an instructor. And the culture that he created there of the workplace and the environment and the relationships with myself and the paraprofessionals, the social workers, and everybody else in the building was just always of the best quality, professionalism, and caring that I think any educator could ask for. So that was from when I first graduated college up until 2 years ago. So for 4 of my 6 years, I worked with my first director of special education. And some of the things that he did to create a caring and inclusive workplace that was sensitive to cultures, different ethnic backgrounds, those of the teachers and all the students in the building was just genuine empathy for everyone else in the building. And he was an older individual. He had been working in education as a math teacher, as a special education coordinator for 35 years when I first met him. So I think sometimes what we see in older educators is sometimes they can be stuck in their ways of how they've always done their practices, some of the habits or traditions they've learned, and those aren't always bad things. But sometimes I think we see uh, experienced educators kind of get stuck in habits and not willing to change or adapt, as our society and cultures continue to change and adapt. But this is one area where I felt my first director of special education really excelled. He was always looking for ways to learn, to grow, learn more about our students and their families and their backgrounds, how they got to this part in their life, where they're looking to go in the future, and also doing the same for the staff in the building as well. And I felt it was genuine and intentional. He was always objective and fair and honest also as well in his assessments of students and other staff, families, and the community around us. So, he really set a standard for me that I hope to live up to myself as I become a director of special education or a director of instruction, somewhere in my future. So, when that time comes for me, I will look back to his example, and I know it was intentional because these practices were exhibited every single day and with everybody he came across. He didn't pick favorites. He didn't have, um, even on days when you felt he was maybe having a bad day due to something outside of school or stress within the job, he still treated everybody with that fairness and was sensitive to all situations and cultures and people that came in the building. So, top-notch job there. And that's something I will try to apply in my own career as I continue to grow and develop myself. On the flip side of that, talk about a culture of the place where you worked in which you did not feel your best as a professional. So on the flip side of that, I mentioned I have had two director of special education in my career so far. So a time when I've not felt my best in that situation would be working in the environment with the second director of special education there. And a few reasons go into that. Uh, When our second director of special education first came into the role, there was a lot of hostility. Um, a lot of the staff felt they were micromanaged. A lot of the students did not feel comfortable with this new director. Families did not feel comfortable with this new director. And this is due to a multitude of reasons, just unprofessional um, treatments of staff and students. Um, I felt some inherent biases or prejudices came into play in some of the decisions and the way they would speak to families and students. Uh, for example, the term "gang bangers" was used in referencing students and families before. That is highly insensitive to the culture, a lot of students, unprofessional language as well, and it sets up a lot of hostility. Um, Also, just using language referencing people of color that I felt was insensitive and unprofessional set off some hard feelings with staff and students and families again alike. In fact, it had reached a point where staff in our building actually filed a complaint with the Human Resources Department um, on this director just due to the unprofessional behavior and treatment of the employees. So, um, whether this is intentional or not, I don't think that anyone in a director role or administrative job, ideally, they're not looking to purposely or intentionally set off or anger or irritate or annoy any of the employees. I like to believe that everyone's intentions are good and their intentions are to improve quality of the school, improve the education, improve the facility, improve our instruction. So I don't believe they're intentional, but at the same time, a lot of this language and these barriers that are being built up um, from the conduct that I saw was happening every single day. And, at some point, I would hope to believe that someone in an administrative role, in a director role, would realize that their behaviors, their methods, uh, are creating a hostile work environment. They are creating a culture that is not inclusive of others and their background, their histories. Um, so that would definitely be a time where I felt um, where I worked as a professional was just not a great setting. But touching back on that to wrap that up, I do believe this director has now in the last recent school year made a lot of good changes to their approach and how they deal with students, how they deal with families and the employees. So credit where credit is due. I believe they have made some genuine changes and maybe they realized some of those errors. So there have been changes made there, and I feel that they are genuine on that end as well. So, but those are a couple examples of times when I felt really good working in my environment. Also, a time when I maybe did not feel my best working in my environment as well. But that kind of wraps up section one there. So we'll jump into section two, where we will start taking a look at RTIs. We'll take a look at, um, the academic and career programming within our schools, the ESL programs, talented and gifted programs, as well as the library and media services as well. So we are looking at the equitable multi-level system of support, which includes response to intervention. A little bit of unique circumstance, if you recall from last week, I work in a therapeutic day program where we partner with local districts around the area. And the RPS 205, the Rockford Public School District, is the main school that we partner with. So they will be the main focus of who I talk with here. But working in special education, a therapeutic day program, all the students in our program are already on IEPs and already have other special services as well. So all of our students have gone through the response to intervention approaches, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and have then been referred for an IEP and special education services. So we don't have students in our program that are in general education. They're all special education students. That being said, however, I do know of the employee in the RPS 205 district who works very closely uh, with that ELMSS system, as well as the response to intervention. And that is an individual named Craig Ucker. And we work with him to, um, he works with the RPS 205 schools to identify students who are at risk or may potentially need special education services. And when those students go through the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 processes, and they have seen that these interventions are not improving their academic standing or their current academic performance levels, that's when Craig starts to work with the families and with the um, other teachers in the buildings to, potentially refer them to our program at Chance Light Education Center. Uh, we also mentioned STAR testing last week as well. STAR testing is a big component of the RPS 205 district. And I have a lot of experience using the STAR testing and looking at that data and using that to uh, you know, help us determine where students are at academically. So with the STAR testing, the two big courses in there are English, so like reading proficiency, reading comprehension, uh, recall and retelling, using context clues to identify text and then information, and then as well as various math academic areas as well. So what STAR testing does is when we look at the data, you know, we can see if we have a 7th grade student, we know that their STAR testing scores of math should be at a certain level. And if a student in the RPS 205 district take the STAR test in math and their levels are dipping below, we can see what type of interventions may be necessary for that student to try to promote growth and trend them up in the right direction, closer to where their peers are at, closer to where the state levels expect them to be and where they're expected to be at grade level. While the STAR testing, I don't believe is a perfect, it's not a perfect tool to measure student success. No one individual test is going to always be perfect. But what I do think it does well is it does use background knowledge, which we see in our units of curriculum as well. And it builds on their background knowledge to see, what they remember, what they recall, and how they can use that background and previous knowledge to then support them in the things they should know now. And that's one area I think STAR testing does do a good job in. So Craig Ecker works closely with that, and he oversees the RTI within RPS 205 in the district there. As far as who coordinates and oversees our academic and career planning programming, couple different areas in there that I wanted to touch on here. So with Chance Light Education Center, where I currently work, we do have a staff member there who works specifically with college and career readiness. And he works with our students to identify what pathway they are going to potentially take in their career, whether they're going to plan to go to college. And if you do plan to go to college, is that a community college in the local area? Is that a four-year university? If you are going to college, what is your plan of attack there? What is going to be your major focus of study? What is going to be your minor area of study, if applicable there? If students are not planning to go to college, what is going to be their career path post-secondary education? And the man that works, I forgot to mention his name, I apologize, is Eric Bressel. And he works with various companies in the Rockford area. Rockford, as I mentioned last week, is a large town, about 90,000 people. So there are a lot of careers and potential careers for students who maybe don't want to go to college, because it is important for us to realize as a school that not every student is going to follow the college model where they go to a community college and get their associates and then transfer to a four-year university. Or not every student is going to jump to a four-year university right out of high school either. There's going to be students who want to jump into a field, want to go to work, and don't want to advance or pursue higher levels of education. And that's also okay as well. However, then becomes our responsibility, and I work with Mr. Bressel to identify those students and have a plan of attack. What types of careers interest you? Do you have family or relatives or know somebody who works in a particular field that you might enjoy? How long have they worked there? Why would you want to work in that service? And we work to bring in speakers, presenters, or other people who can touch on these topics with the students and provide them information. For example, a big one that we had this last year was we had a handful of students who were interested in becoming truck drivers post secondary education. And we worked with one of the local community colleges in in the Rockford area to come in and talk about their truck driving program. A lot of community colleges or colleges in general, might have a 1 or 2 year program that are designed to help students get ready for careers. And we can provide that information to them and show them that maybe you don't want to pursue a level of education such as an associate's or bachelor's degree, but there are programs in place to help you find a career that will, provide for you. And we also work with other companies as well to bring relevant information. We also bring in college recruiters for those students interested as well. We have the Rockford Valley Community College, RVC, in Rockford. We also have another community college called the Highland Community College close to our area as well. We work with to bring in Northern Illinois University, someone we've worked with before as well. So it depends on what our students are looking for. Um, we only have 20 secondary or high school level students in our program. So makes things a little bit easier for us because not all those, some of those students are just freshman students and, um, maybe they don't have an area identified yet, but we start working with freshman students on just garnering ideas on what they might think they want to do, what are some of their interests, and what are some of their hobbies or skills. And then as they get older, we have sophomore students, junior students, and especially senior level students, really narrowing those topics down and then bringing in those resources from the outside to speak with them, present to them, and give them more information on what they could do to find out that information. Um, with RPS 205, they do things a little bit differently in their public school system there as well. So real quickly here, I can share with you the director of their college and career readiness in the RPS 205 district is Reed Jutras, and the executive director of college and career readiness is Bridget French. And what they do in RPS 205 is every student who comes into the building chooses a academy. So when you become a freshman and you go to East High School in Rockford or Jefferson High School or Guilford High School, you choose an academy. And that academy then kind of works similar to what we do at Chanslate, where you start to form ideas about this is your roadmap for high school. This is what you need to accomplish your freshman year, your sophomore year, your junior year, and your senior year. And as they go through their academy and as they go, through their high school career, they start to form ideas and start to form more specific areas where they might want to work, might want to go to school, and other things along those lines. So that's kind of how it works in RPS 205 and at the Chanslate Education Center. Who coordinates and oversees your ESL program? And tell me what you know about ESL. So at the Chanslate Education Center, we do not have a designated ESL program. At Chanslate, we have gotten students referred to us before who are ESL or ELL students, and since we don't have a designated area for ESL learners or ESL students, we typically do not take in those referral students. In the past, though, just to speak on some of my experiences with ESL learners, we have had students come in to our program who are not maybe proficient in English or who struggle with English. And what we have done in the past is we're very fortunate at the Chanslate Education Center to have a social worker and a paraprofessional who are fluent in Spanish, and they have worked closely with those students to improve their bilingual skills so that they can understand the English language and succeed in schools, the language that might be unfamiliar or difficult to understand for them. So, while we don't have a designated program for that, we have had students in the past who have trouble speaking English, and I will work with the social worker and that paraprofessional to design times in the day when a particular student can go and work one-on-one with them in different content areas. So what I have done in the past is I had a student in my classroom, a female student who really struggled with um, her English work because she spoke Spanish at home. And, then at school, she's expected to speak and read fluently in English. So what I would do is I'd modify her work for her to provide her work in both English format as well as a Spanish format as well. So she could get that experiences in both languages and hopefully help her to make the connections between the two. But in the RPS 205 district, they do have um, a bilingual department who I know also works. They kind of merge that bilingual department in with the ELL and ESL students. So uh, the director or the supervisor in that department is Ala Harnish, and there are a lot of members who work in the bilingual department here in RPS 205. They have a number of translators who work with students in social worker or um, psych worker settings, work in IEP meetings. They also have data supports for bilingual students and the data that comes in with them. They also have family support systems that work with the families of these students as well. So they do have a lot of staff dedicated to ELL learners, to ESL learners. An experience that I've heard of and seen a little bit in the RPS 205 schools is that these learners uh, typically work in like maybe one-on-one or small group settings with either ESL instructors or their ESL teachers, depending on their needs. Um, I know one school in RPS 205, one of the middle schools actually has a classroom that's dedicated to the Arabic language because they do have a population of students who speak and read and write in the Arabic language. So they have an Arabic language teacher who works specifically with that group of students. So I do have some programs there that are designed just for those purposes as well. Who coordinates and oversees our talented and gifted program, and just some general information about the talented and gifted program as well. Um, at the Chancellor Education Center, we do not have a talented and gifted program as we work with all special education students who need intervention or special education services and support. However, I do know that the RPS 205 schools does have a talented and gifted program where they work with students, and that talented and gifted program here is the executive director of schools and special programs. That is Heather Saltese. And I know that she has been with the RPS 205 district for 2 years now. She's relatively new to the district, but she works specifically with the Gifted Academy in the RPS 205 district. So the Gifted Academy is one of many specialized programs in the Rockford Public Schools district. And the Gifted Academy, there are some different ways to join that Gifted Academy. More information is found, on their website here. Besides families working to potentially have their child tested for gifted programs, teachers as well will also work to identify talented and gifted students, and that's used when they're working through their units of instruction. If they are identifying students who consistently exhibit uh, the ability to score above state levels, above those state standards, above their peers, they can be identified by their teachers. But sometimes as well, parents may also want their child to be tested for gifted or talented programs. And there are testing dates every year. Testing dates for fall 2022, this upcoming school year, are found below. Our summer testing event is now available at testing on Saturday, June 18th. Results will be shared the week of June 20th. So if you want your child to be tested, there was testing available for 9th and 10th graders there. The Gifted Academy program in the Rockford Public Schools affirms the need to identify students with potential at any point in their educational career and to provide the kinds of educational services which will enable them to demonstrate a level of achievement commensurate with their potential. So, whether we are looking at special education students or if we are looking at students who are deemed gifted or talented above their peer level, it is our responsibility to service all those students. Sometimes with gifted and potential students, when I talk to people outside of the educational world, they might think that gifted and talented only refers to students who are above state standards or state levels. Or they might think that gifted and talented refers to students who are below state levels or state standards, such as students on IEPs or 504 plans. However, we know that includes both sections of students, and it is our responsibility and our job to service all those students. If we have students with IEPs or students who are below those state standard levels, it is our responsibility and our job to provide interventions and supports for them to take them, from where they are and raise them, hopefully to the levels of their peers or get them trending in a positive direction. Just as the same case with students who are maybe above the state levels and standards. It is also our responsibility to provide them with an education that continues to challenge them and also support them. If we are leaving them at a level that is not challenging them or not providing, academic support for them, we are also doing them and their families a disservice as well, and we are causing their academic and educational careers to become stagnant. So we need to identify both levels of students and all students who we deem are talented and gifted and place them in the appropriate programs and appropriate educational settings that will continue to challenge them and have them thrive instead of being in an environment where, again, maybe things become stagnant for them and they don't see any more growth. And lastly here, who coordinates and oversees all of your programming for library and media services, and just some other information about the library and media service program as well. In the RPS 205 district, I know that their director of not just facilities, but also the director of library and media services is Scott Jensen. No relation to myself, other than a coincidence of last name. He's the director of facilities, library and media services as well in the RPS 205 district. Now with the library and media services as well, some information about them that we should all be familiar with. The library and media services encompasses a lot of things in a school district. It's a very complex and unique system that just has a wealth of information in there. So ideally, a library media services, this is what we're looking for. Using high quality, standards aligned, and district adopted instructional materials. I think the key term here is that the content in our library media services should be standards aligned. They should be aligned to those state standards. Whether that's Illinois, Wisconsin, Iowa, California, we need to have the standards present in our services. I'm also focusing on culturally and linguistically responsive teaching practices that promote learning. And we're going to talk more about cultures and cultural practices in just a moment here. And then also leveraging technology to empower students to create, collaborate, communicate, and think critically. We're also going to touch on collaboration as well when we start to get more towards sections 3 and 4 of our discussion today. But school library programs ensure that students and teachers have access to media collections that include a variety of print, non-print, reference, and electronic resources. School libraries impact studies show that school libraries have a positive effect on student outcomes as they teach 21st century skills, promote active engagement and critical thinking, and develop independent learners. But usually the library database as well is administered in a catalog, so that'll all be found in one central database there. And the library media services also serve important functions, such as formative practices, explicit instruction, and meaningful student engagement as well. So library media services is going to house a ton of district material that is accessed by administrators, directors, teachers, students, parents, families. All this information is going to be found in our library and media services. And again, this material in there should be standards aligned and should focus on culturally and linguistically responsive teaching practices. Especially as we continue to grow in technology and become more aware and inclusive in our teaching practices in regards to cultures and different ethnicities, those need to be at the forefront of our services there as well. Touching on some of these roles, some things that excite or worry me about overseeing these state initiatives. There's a lot of information that goes into these programs, the talented and gifted programs, the RTI programs, the library media services. There's a lot of information that goes into those. And as we looked through some of the staff directories and some of the people in charge of those, the one thing that I think we need to keep in mind is we're going to be working with a very, very large team of individuals and people. And that's also why I touched on the collaboration there briefly, because collaboration is going to be of vital importance to us. We need to work collaboratively and effectively with other individuals to keep these services and centers functioning correctly and highly efficiently as well. We're not going to be able to cover every one of these areas by ourselves. And we're not going to always know every ounce of information that goes into them. But we need to work with the others in those areas to ensure that our operations are running at maximum capacity, maximum efficiency, so that we are best serving our students, best serving our families, our schools, our teachers, and supporting all who are involved in our schools as well. So that kind of takes a wrap on section 2. Section 3 here, we'll be taking a look at defining a culture as it relates to the context of a school district. We'll be looking at the process of facilitating change within a specific context. And we also critique how school districts normally examine beliefs and values. And we'll see that through like school visions, mission statements, and other aspects of there as well. But more specifically here, as we go through some of this material, we are going to be looking at some works from Jared Clark on the impact of school culture upon an educational institution. And we will also be taking a look at, excuse me, I cannot get the top bar to go away. There we go. We'll also be taking a look at some of the work from Diane Beth Van Bodengraven and how they implement changes in schools. And then touching back on those school vision and mission statements, we'll also be taking a look at some of this work up in University of Berkeley as well. But starting here at the top with the impact of school culture um, and how school cultures, impact um, our institutions and those around us. One thing that we're going to be looking at here is how a culture impacts schools and how cultures are created in schools. So if we look at how we define a culture, um, if culture truly is a difference maker, it is important to have a thorough understanding of how culture is defined and the role that it plays within an organization. The word culture is derived from the Latin word colere, which means cultivating, growing, or trending. According to Hofstede, culture is the collective programming of the mind, which distinguishes the members of one organization from another. In essence, culture is the way an organization thinks and acts. Culture is also defined as the framework that a group can use to solve problems. So as we look at this here, I think a good example that they bring up is school leadership. And as we look at school cultures and how those are crafted and shaped throughout our schools, a large amount of responsibility is placed upon the principal or head of school, with smaller amounts of responsibility placed upon the teachers and other staff members. This typical hierarchy resembles the following diagram. So when we're looking at the culture of a school, how that's crafted, how that's created, how that's carried out, how that's sustained, it really does start at the top with the administrative or director role team. And those of us who are looking to become administrators, become a director of special education, become a director of curriculum and instruction, we are going to have a very large role, and we fit into this top chain here of having a large amount of responsibility placed upon us. We are the leaders within the schools. We are the ones setting the examples. We are the ones setting the precedents. We are the ones who carry out initiatives. And then we are the ones who hold others, such as teachers, accountable for carrying out those same culturally responsive practices that we want to see within our schools. So we set that standard. Most schools in the United States resemble this type of structure that places most of the decision-making process in the hands of the administrator. So, again, he's just touching on the importance of it really is up to us to set those examples and set those precedents. We need to be at the head. We need to be the ones who tell our teachers, school social workers, psychologists, paraprofessionals, and all the others, like, hey, this is what we are looking for. Um, this is the culture we want to create of caring, inclusiveness, empathy. Um, and not only that in regards to how we care and perceive others, but also in professional practices as well. When we are working on our RTI programs, our talented and gifted programs, we are looking at our college and career readiness programs. Creating a culture where those programs are of the highest standards and where those programs are ones where they have a culture of success and sustained success going forward in the future as well. Programs where people feel comfortable sending their child because they know they will find success there. And then, that ultimately trickles down to our students as well. Excuse me. Um, when students see that their teachers are cultivating and creating a culture of success and caring and professional growth, teachers also see that from their administrators. And we see that from the top going on down. Um, the more consistency we see within that program, um, the more we're going to see that within our other administrative teams. Then we're going to see that within all the other teachers in our programs. Then we're also going to see that trickle down to our student population as well. Touching then upon how we describe the process of facilitating change within a specific context. When we are facilitating and implementing change, Diane Beth Bodergraven talks about how, why, and when teachers change their classroom practices. As we know, practices within classrooms and cultures within classrooms may also change as well over time. Things within the classroom should not always just be stagnant either. We shouldn't expect the practices within a classroom from 10 years ago to necessarily just be identical sometime in the future. We need to constantly be looking at our practices and how we use our systems to create change and positive change within our classrooms. And I believe that a lot of that is going to um, come from collaboration within our teachers and our teacher and administrative relationships as well. So here she talks about using systems thinking to support teacher change, and she uses the example of children and families. So I'll just read very briefly through this. So although Sage demonstrated that systems thinking can be an effective way to help schools adapt to change by becoming learning organizations, by and large, research applying systems theory to schools has focused on family systems, not the organizational system. For example, Johnson and Sturge, Apple, Davies, and Cummings examined how family systems impact the school behaviors of young children and found that children from cohesive families demonstrated few behaviors that negatively impacted school performance. Children from disengaged families, however, demonstrated negative external behaviors, such as aggression, while children from enmeshed families exhibited internal behaviors such as depression. These behaviors impacted school performance, although the internalized behaviors were less disruptive than the external manifestations. In another study, Hardaway, Wilson, Shaw, and Dijon examined how chaos in family systems is correlated with anger, aggression, and attention problems in school-age children. Hardaway found that self-regulation skills were lacking in these children, a finding which supports the idea that E1 competencies and systems thinking constructs can be better understood in the context of how they are interrelated. Austin and Harkins are some of the few researchers that have applied systems thinking to the interactions between school staff rather than to the families of schools. They investigated how conflict resolution training impacted the collaborative climate of an administrative team in a preschool facility in New England. They go on to talk about some of that research. The key term here is conflict resolution training impacting the collaborative climate of an administrative team. Now, as we are facilitating changes within schools, as they mention here, the interactions between school staff are going to have a large influence and a very large impact on how changes are implemented throughout a school or throughout a classroom. If we are not working in a collaborative manner with other teachers, with our administrative teams, we are not going to see changes implemented successfully or effectively in a school. I know students who come into schools, they notice the interactions between teachers to teacher. They notice the interactions between a principal and a teacher. They notice the interactions between a teacher and a paraprofessional or teacher aide. So it is of vital importance that we work in collaborative manners and we have the right trainings and conflict training with our staff to know how to handle different situations within the classroom that then allow us to make the appropriate changes in our classrooms. When we make changes in our classrooms, they must be made through the right resolution trainings that are going to impact our teachers and administrative teams, in ways that will positively, will affect our classrooms and affect the ways that, we try to implement change in our schools and their educational settings. And then lastly, we'll take a look here at critiquing how school districts normally examine beliefs and values. With school beliefs and values, we see these through the vision and mission statements in schools. And when we look at a school vision or school mission statements, I think we're going to see a lot of similarities between different schools. We're not going, we're going to see a lot of school mission statements and values that are very, very similar in wording and how they're presented, but just some very indistinguishable differences finding there. In fact, a lot of the time, the differences between one school's vision and mission statements compared to another's might just be semantics. So we're not going to see drastic changes there, but vision and mission statements provide schools with an overview of where they want to go and what they want to be. Vision and mission statements establish clear expectations and standards for the whole school community and help the school reach common goals. A vision statement is a collective expression of the school's aspirations. A vision is concise and easy to recall. So vision statements are going to be something about, where the school wants to be. What are their goals for? An example could be how many students go to college. Another vision statement could be what percentage of their students graduate from the high school. A mission statement provides an overview of the steps to achieve that future vision. A mission is lengthier and is the how-to statements that help schools achieve their vision. So the mission statement is going to be the steps taken for how the visions will be carried out. So for example, if one of the vision statements of a school is, our vision is to have our students academically and socially prepared to attend college in their post-secondary life. The mission statement is then going to be, well, how are you going to prepare students for college? What steps are you taking to get them there? Are there programs within your high school that prepare them for college? But what specifically are you doing to prepare them? What can you show teachers, parents, students, and the community what you're doing to achieve your vision statement? So the vision statement is kind of the overarching or bigger picture, and the mission statement is the fine print or the fine details. This is what we're doing to get there. Our last section here, we are going to look at some of the readings from our authors, Larry Ainsworth and Kiara Donovan, and their work in rigorous curriculum design. And specifically, we're going to be looking at some of the issues in here. So section 4, our first matter to address is how you know where to start when you begin to design curricular units with the stakeholders that you will lead. So when we are looking um, at the information here, I'll give you a quick overview of what specifically we are looking at. The unit planning organizer is a universal template to be used in every grade and content area in order to guarantee a consistent format across the school system. Um, when we are designing our curricular units with the stakeholders, it is important for them to know what the unit planning organizer is. And we touched on this last week as well, but these stakeholders do need to know what the plan is for designing these curricular units. And we get there by knowing what our template is, how we're going to use this in every grade and content area, and how that's going to support us as well to get to that area as well. Now they have to see a clear and defined roadmap there. So design teams usually begin the process with the first unit of study listed on their pace and calendar. There are multiple ways to present this information to our stakeholders, but typically I begin, I think the best place to begin and where we decide where to start is really just to start from the beginning. So I think that makes it a little bit easier for us to then show stakeholders, this is our beginning steps, and this is how we build off it, and this is where we go in the future. It is important to note that is not the only way to do that. They do mention here that on occasion, however, design teams decide to start with a unit scheduled for the middle of the school year. They do this so that when the unit is completed, the participating teachers can pilot the unit during the same school year rather than waiting until the start of the next school year to administer the first unit listed on the pacing calendar. Before our purposes here, we're going to take a look at situation 1 and how we can present that information in our units of instruction here. So when we are looking at all this information, we're presenting it to our stakeholders. In this situation, we're going to assume that we are a school or school system leader, a curriculum supervisor, or a classroom educator in a school system that's starting from scratch to revise existing curricula using this curriculum design model. Together, our colleagues have identified and vertically aligned the priority standards. We have organized and decided on units of study for each grade level and course within one or more content areas. And we have assigned the priority standards and supporting standards to those units, as well as created the pacing calendars and customized the unit planning organizer. There's a lot of information that goes into there. But essentially, when we are presenting this information to others, we can show them that we have worked with our team to create our pacing calendars. We have created our unit planning organizers. We have identified what our priority standards are and what our supporting standards are as well, and how those are going to fit into our units of study. Also important to note here as well, before you go on to develop a unit of study, it is vitally important to go back and review your priority standards using the 4 established selection criteria: readiness, leverage, endurance, and alignment to end-of-year state assessments. And that is something that we covered in our last week's topic as well. But continuing with section 1 here, One or more of our priority standards do not match a set of criteria, and therefore need to be reclassified as supporting standards. Just wanted to point that out as well, because it is important to notice that as we create and go through these units of learning, we might find that as we are assigning standards to these units of instruction, we might find that we are mixing or matching some of our priority or supporting standards. And it is okay to, maybe flip some of those around. But, our stakeholders want to know, I believe, where we are starting and what is our direction. Do we have a roadmap planned out? Do we have a clear and defined path for how we're going to design these curricular units? And are these curricular units align with our standards, our priority standards, our primary standards, as well as our supporting standards as well. So they need to see that information, through our pacing calendars and through our, through the process we have gone through with our colleagues to create this information here. But as we work with units of curriculum as well, we're going to see this term here, and excuse me for that. We're going to see the term unwrapping and unwrapping priority standards. So what exactly does it mean to unwrap a priority standard? Because the priority standards are the focal points in the design of a rigorous and relevant curriculum, they need to be carefully analyzed by educators to determine exactly what students need to know and be able to do in advance of curriculum, instruction, and assessment planning. Only by examining the actual wording of a standard can educators decide for themselves what a standard means in terms of student learning outcomes. We call this processing of analyzing the priority standards for clarity of meaning unwrapping. So simply put, unwrapping, just like we unwrap a gift or unravel or unwrap a large piece of text, we're just looking and analyzing those standards for clarity. Now, what do these standards mean? What exactly does this standard expect our students to know and be able to do? Those are the main pieces of information we need to be able to take away from the priority standards. What are students going to be able to do, and what do they need to know from these standards? You might see a couple interchangeable words as well that they use for unwrapping. You might see deconstructing. You also might see the word unpacking as well. But whether we are looking at unpacking, deconstructing, or unwrapping our standards, they all mean the same thing. Just making sure that we understand, what these standards are expecting of our students. Because if we don't know what these standards expect of our students, then we are not going to know how to teach these standards. And we are not going to know where to assign these standards to our units of instruction as well. Moving on to our next question here, though. What is important to know when leading others to create unit assessments? So when we are creating assessments for our units of instruction, we touched on assessments last week as well, and the purpose and importance of assessments. Assessments help us to know where students are currently standing, maybe where they're heading. Do they need enrichment? Do they need interventions? Do they need support? So how do we know what is the importance of creating these units assessments? We have a few important steps here that we'll go through. And essentially there are 6 of them. So one of the first important steps to know when we are creating our unit assessments is to know our purpose. All the assessment literature points to this underlying first step in a planning assessment. What question or questions do you want the assessment to answer? What exactly do you want to find out from the assessment results? The bottom line, why are you administering the assessments in the first place? I believe the key term here is why. We have to understand the why. Why are we administering these assessments? Are they to measure academic performance levels? Are they to try to determine trends within a particular unit of instruction? Are they to determine if the primary and supporting standards are being met? But why are these assessments in place? Step 2, determine the appropriate assessment that will accomplish your identified purpose. In this context, appropriate means the specific format that you're most likely to tell you what you want to know. The major assessment formats and their related types are selected response, so things like multiple choice, true false, matching, fill in the blanks, or constructed responses, short or extended writing, and performance-based, physical, demonstration. So this would be things like projects on poster boards, maybe small or large group work could be seen in this performance-based as well. But when we have determined why we're going to administer assessments, we then need to figure out what type of assessment is the most appropriate here. And I believe that we want to, throughout the year, and depending on the unit of instruction, mix and match. We want to have some selected responses. We want to have some constructed responses. We also want to have some performance-based assessments as well. We don't want to get in the habit of just doing the same types of assessments over and over again. Now, we don't want to just have multiple choice and true false assessments for our students from the beginning of the school year throughout the end of the school year. We need to mix and match in other types of assessments to continue to promote critical thinking and retention skills for our students, so students can continue to exhibit their own learning in different manners as well. We also then need to select or create a quality assessment. We need to take great care in choosing questions from an external source or crafting the assessment questions ourselves. If a question is faulty in any way and students answer it incorrectly, educators will later have to determine whether the question was poorly written or whether students simply did not know the content on which it was based. Decide whether the planned questions included in the assessment will enable you to make an accurate inference as to what students know and can do. And this last sentence here is really the key. When we create these assessments, they can't just be recall and retell binary pieces of information. That does have its value and it does have its purpose, but we need to be able to make accurate inferences as to what students know and to what students can do. So when we are creating questions or when we are creating these projects for students or creating writing prompts, are we promoting higher levels of thinking and functioning for students that will force them to recall on things they should already know and then expand on things they have learned and should know based on the standards from the end of a particular unit of instruction. Then we're going to administer and score the assessments and analyze the assessment results. And here we need to look for evidence of student learning specific to the purpose in the student responses. We need to conduct an item analysis, determining which questions individual students answered correctly and which ones they did not. So when we are looking and administering and scoring the assessments, we'll look for evidence of student learning. And specifically here, we're going to look for, how can we tell in our assessments that students were learning? Can we tell that they learned by the number of questions they answered correctly? Like, for example, if we did a multiple choice exam, what percentage are we looking at to determine student success? If we are doing uh, a project-based assessment, does the student project and the criteria that we presented to them promote them to include, all contents of the standards they should know at the end of that unit of instruction? So just making sure that students are meeting those criteria there. And the last couple steps here, we need to make an accurate inference. This will be possible only if the assessment questions that you selected or created in step 3 are of quality and provide valid and reliable evidence of student learning. And then our final steps, step 6, adjust instructional decisions in a timely manner. Determine instructional next steps for students, whether that's individual, small group, or whole class, based on the inferences you have made. So those are the important pieces of information for us to know, when we are, um, excuse me, when we are, creating unit assessments and leading others, and when we're working with our teachers, and what we tell teachers what they need to know when they are creating assessments for the end of their units. This also helps and kind of ties into what should you remember when helping staff um, plan on engaging in relevant learning experiences as well. And we'll touch back on that, back on their work here. When we are engaging in meaningful learning experiences, engaging is synonymous with interesting and compelling. Experience produce personal insights that are deeper and longer lasting than explanations. A rigorous curriculum ought to be both engaging and relevant. So when we are working with our teachers and also students on learning experiences, we don't just want to present information to them that goes in one ear and out the other. We don't want this information to be presented in a way where it's something they need to know or just memorize for an assessment, and then they can't forget about it and it's not relevant to future learning or previous learning. So ways that we can do this is to provide connections from our units of instruction to interesting and compelling or relevant aspects of our lives and of our students' lives as well. So for example, one way that I have done this in the past with my own students is when we are working with information in mathematics, for example, and talking about percentages and why it's important to know percentages. I use the example of shopping, whether that's online or in stores. When we go to a store and you see an item that is marked as 20% off its original price, when we come to our fractions unit or our decimal unit, our percentages units in mathematics, that is a relevant and engaging piece of information to students. When students are shopping for clothes, shoes, video games, or whatever it is online, we can use that example there. This is an example of why you need to know percentages, why you need to know fractions, why you need to be able to calculate percentages off. Or when you go to a restaurant, you're expected to tip at the end of your meal. If you can calculate what a 10% tip is, a 15%, 20%, these are skills that are going to help you not only here in the classroom, but also going to help you outside in your daily life as an adult as well. So try to provide some connection to there as well. We want to also make relevant and engaging experiences for the student as well. I believe we're also going to see this in technology, and I think they put it very well here. In this digital age, technology certainly plays a huge role in our daily lives. Classroom teachers should always consider how they might integrate digital tools within their lessons. However, we do want to be careful that the digital tool is not the critical element. What is critical is this: clearly identifying student learning outcomes in the unwrapped priority standards. We touched on this in our week 1 discussion. Technology is of vital importance to our everyday lives, whether that's social, emotional, academic. We see technology everywhere. Technology is of the utmost importance to us. Therefore, it is going to be important to us to use technology as much as we can and where it is relevant. Students today especially are very familiar with technology. They're up to date on new forms of technology and how technology impacts their own lives. An example of this I used this year was students who were interested in a career as a car technician or working in the automotive industry. There are online tools that we use where students were able to look at 3D models of car engines, of car parts, and to kind of see how car mechanics can use that technology to help them in their line of work. We could also use this in units of our biology or science curricular units where we're looking at um, um, looking at digesting animals. Maybe not every school has the resources to break down or look at animals under proper lab precautions, but we can simulate some of these technologies through our technological world. So using those as an example as well, but keeping in mind that our units should be relevant to the real world, should be interdisciplinary. So when we can, if we can cross over our math and science units together, those two usually go hand in hand pretty well. Could also cross over some of our science and social studies or history and geography, but finding interdisciplinary crossovers to promote student thinking and engagement, because this will also help to provide mentally stimulating and thought-provoking lessons for our students as well. But going on top of that, we also are looking at different instructional strategies that are used in the classrooms as well. So when we're looking at different instructional strategies, there are a few of them that are discussed here in our text. And pull that up. We'll go over here. And the one that caught my eye as well was the visible learning research approach. And the visible learning research approach provides a wealth of specific instructional strategies and their corresponding effect size related to student learning. These include 3 types of implementations: those that emphasize an individual's teaching strategies, those that emphasize school-wide teaching strategies, and those using technologies. Part of the reason that I was drawn to the visible learning research approach was because of the emphasis on using technologies. We had just talked about the importance of using technologies in our schools and why they are important. Um, because students are going to continue to use technologies. Schools are going to continue to use technologies, and technologies do help us to reach students on an individual level. They help us reach students in small group instructions and also large group instructions as well. Last week in our week 1 discussion, we touched on the importance and emphasis of how technologies are still playing a role in schools today, even though our remote learning days have come and drawn to a close. We see the use of iPads and laptops and other technologies still very, very relevant to schools. And the good thing about those technologies is they will help us with the individual teaching strategies and also to help emphasize school-wide teaching strategies as well. But one thing as well is when we are working with these instructional approaches, instead of asking what works, we should be asking what works best. No, whatever approach we take in our designing of curricular units, in our implementations of them, and our assessments of them, we not only need to look at what's working for our students, but which one is working the best for our students. Where are we seeing the best results? Where are we seeing the most growth? Where are we students thrive at the highest levels? But these are the things that we need to be looking at and need to be emphasizing, as we go through our units of curricular instruction here and design. The last part here we have is detailing the unit planning organizer. So what does it mean to detail the unit planning organizer? And specifically, the unit detailing the planet's unit organizer. The curriculum design teams that we have supported in school districts over the years intentionally provide general suggestions for adding instructional strategies and resources to the unit planning organizer for each unit of study. To promote and allow for teacher choice and the classroom-specific adjustments of instruction educators must make each day, curriculum design teams have left the adding of specific details to the educators to be completed when they prepare to administer each unit of study. So when we are creating these planning organizers, it's important for us to allow adjustments and flexibility within them. And that is the main focus of detailing the unit planning organizer. The unit planning organizer, does provide a good guide map for us and provides a roadmap for students and teachers, but it also does allow for adjustments on the fly as necessary. I think all of us who work in education know that things sometimes suddenly change on a whim or on a dime. We have to maybe make an adjustment here or there, and that's what we have those buffer days for as well. But detailing this design process, helps us to show teachers, what they can expect to know, and help students what they can expect to know as well. But with the design process, we also have some other elements in here as well. We have our name of unit of study. We have our pacing guidelines, so the number of instructional days for the unit, As you looked at last week, this is going to detail, how long that instructional unit is going to be. Is it going to be 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks? How many buffer days are allowed in there? It's going to show our priority standards and supporting standards within this unit. It's going to show our unwrapped priority standards. It's going to show our big ideas and essential questions. It's going to also show our pre and post unit assessments. It's going to show our interdisciplinary connections. So again, those crossovers between maybe geography and history, or a crossover between science and mathematics. It's going to have our assessment answer keys and scoring guide success criteria. So we touched on that earlier as well. How are we going to determine, what the level of success is in our assessments? It's also going to have vocabulary that is pertinent or important to the unit as well. So this kind of shows what the design process is, what can be found in there, what can be found in our units of instruction as well. And then wrapping it up, how will you model intentionally planning and administering the units of study? So when we are looking at those results, we're looking at the purpose of lesson plans, I think, is a big part of how we are going to model planning and administering the units of study. Lesson plans help us to do that. So just some important notes here on the purpose of lesson plans. Educators need to see a clear benefit in filling out a daily or weekly lesson planner, or it becomes difficult to justify the time required to do it. In truth, written lesson plans, along with classroom observational visits, benefit administrators by helping them determine with clarity, one, what the intended learning targets are, and two, the quality of lessons taking place in the classroom, and three, the degree to which the learning needs of all students are being met. Because both the educator and the administrator are accountable for student learning, written lesson plans, along with related discussions, help administrators determine how to support educators in whatever ways are needed. The big key here is the collaboration they emphasize between the administrative team and the teachers, in regards to lesson planning. Collaborative planning and writing of daily lessons can be of great help in this regard. Teachers can divide up the workload while sharing ideas with one another. We need that collaboration with our teachers and within our schools and within our school environment. And we do this by working with our teachers to show them, what the importance of these lessons plans are, how we can plan and administer these units of study. There's a lot of information that goes into these units of study, and we can't just administer these units of study on a whim or on a basis without a plan of attack. And those lesson plans help us to create that plan of attack and to know, like, hey, on Monday, this is what we are doing. On Tuesday, this is what we're doing. On Wednesday, this is what we're doing. I understand where teachers come from when they say lesson plans are a waste of time. We don't need them. But it is our job as educational leaders, as administrators and directors, to work with them and show them, hey, this is why they're needed, and this is how I'm going to use them to help you as well. As they mentioned previously, and as we read, it is not just the job of teachers to find student success in the classroom. That job is also the administrator's job as well. We do not just keep it onto the instructor. We take responsibility for student success and student failures as much as the teacher does. And I believe that working collaboratively with the teachers will help them to understand that and also to show them that we are there to support them in their growth. But rather than having to forge a new path without a compass or a map, such leaders gratefully welcome guidance, suggestions, and recommendations from those who themselves have already traveled traversed the distance and implemented this process successfully. Now, as we become school leaders and educators, it will be important for us to also reach out to other administrators that we know or previously have known or have worked with to gain their insights and their thoughts and their opinions on what um, their successes have been, where they have learned, where they have grown. Just as teachers work with veteran teachers to learn and to grow, to share their experiences with. We will also do the same in those roles in administration. And then we will pass on knowledge that we know and knowledge and things that we have learned to help our teachers and to help our students learn and grow as well. So that is all we have for this week. Any questions or additional information that is needed, please feel free to reach out. But thank you for tuning in and watching this video. And I hope that it met the criteria of what we are looking for. So thank you.